I'm Scarlett Evans, and until about 2 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. 26 years old, living in the vibrant chaos of Atlanta, Georgia. My days were a whirlwind of marketing campaigns for a local tech startup, trying to make a name for myself in a city that pulsed with ambition. Evenings were spent catching up with friends, exploring new restaurants, or just unwinding with a good book. Life was full, independent, and by most standards, pretty great. The one missing piece, or so I thought, was Mark. Mark and I had been together for almost 3 years. We met at a mutual friend's wedding in Savannah, a whirlwind weekend romance that blossomed into a serious, long-distance relationship. He lived a few states away, and while the distance was challenging, we made it work. Or at least, I thought we did. We'd FaceTime every night, planning our next visits, talking about our future, our dreams. He was charming, funny, and always seemed to know how to make me laugh, even on my toughest days. We had this unspoken understanding, a bond that felt unbreakable, forged across miles and phone screens. He was my rock, my confidant, the person I pictured building a life with. But then, things started to shift. It began subtly, like a faint crack in a perfectly smooth surface. His calls became shorter, his texts less frequent. There were times I'd ask him about his day, and his answers would be vague, almost evasive. He'd be busy more often or tired. I'd brush it off, telling myself it was just the stress of his job or the general grind of life, but the little things piled up. He'd suddenly turn his phone away when I was around or quickly clear his notifications. He started showering me with gifts almost excessively, like he was trying to distract me or perhaps atone for something. My gut, that nagging little voice that usually knows best, started screaming. About 2 months ago, the screams became impossible to ignore. I was visiting him for a long weekend, one of our cherished breaks from the distance. We were having a quiet evening watching a movie, when his phone buzzed with a message. He instinctively snatched it, almost defensively, and flipped it face down. My heart sank. That was it. The culmination of all the small doubts, the whispers in my head, solidified into a cold, hard certainty. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice even, though my hands were already shaking. "Mark," I began, my voice a little higher than I intended. "Can I see your phone?" He froze. His entire body tensed like a deer caught in headlights. He looked at me, his eyes wide, a flicker of panic in them. Then, almost immediately, it was replaced by anger. A swift, aggressive defensiveness that hit me like a physical blow. He launched into a tirade, accusing me of not trusting him, of being paranoid, of trying to control him. He absolutely refused. That refusal, more than any vague answer or turned-away screen, confirmed everything I needed to know. The man I loved, my Mark, was cheating on me. A tidal wave of emotions hit me: betrayal, hurt, confusion, and a searing anger. The carefully constructed world we had built together, brick by brick, came crashing down around me. "That's it," I heard myself say, the words raw and unsteady. "I can't do this anymore, I want to break up." His anger shifted. It transformed into a sneer, a cruel twisting of his lips that I had never seen before. "You'll never be happy without me, Scarlett," he spat, his voice laced with venom. "You're too dependent, too fragile." Something inside me snapped. All the years I had spent building myself up, proving my strength, pushing through setbacks, were suddenly reduced to nothing by his petty malice. The accusation of fragility, of being unable to stand on my own, stung more than anything. "Fine," I shot back, my voice trembling with rage, but also with a desperate attempt to reclaim some shred of my dignity. "I'll find someone who actually sees my strength, someone who doesn't need to tear me down to feel big." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that chilled me to the bone. "Oh, Scarlett," he drawled, shaking his head. "You're so vanilla. My other girl really knew how to set a fire. I guess your next boyfriend will just have lower expectations for passion." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Vanilla, not passionate enough, lower expectations. It wasn't just an insult. It was a complete dismissal of my worth, an attack on my very essence as a woman, as a lover, as a human being. It implied I was boring, unadventurous, and ultimately not enough. The man I had loved and trusted had reduced me to a mere comparison and found me lacking. It was a wound that went deeper than the cheating, festering in the core of my self-worth. In some bizarre, twisted way, we managed to calm down. The raw emotion faded into a heavy, suffocating silence. He begged, he pleaded, he cried. He told me it was a mistake, that he loved me, that he couldn't live without me. And like an idiot, or maybe just someone desperately clinging to the hope of what we once had, I let myself be swayed. We got back together a few days later, a fragile truce built on shaky ground, ignoring the gaping wound he had inflicted. But the reprieve was short-lived. Just 3 days after we tentatively put the pieces back together, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah, one of Mark's closest friends, a woman I had always considered a friend too. Her message was simple, chilling, and utterly damning. "You're playing a very dangerous game with both of them." The blood drained from my face, my stomach lurched. Both of them. Not just a mistake, not just a one-off. He wasn't just cheating, he was juggling. The truth, cold and undeniable, hit me with full force. He hadn't just made a mistake, he had been living a double life. Sarah's message, a desperate plea for me to see the light, severed the last thread of hope I had. This time there was no calming down. There was no going back. I ended it for good. We broke up officially. But even after all of that, even after everything he had said and done, he continued to call, to text, to send desperate messages saying he didn't want to lose me. Each message was like a fresh stab, a cruel reminder of his deceit and my pain. What truly gnawed at me, however, wasn't just the cheating or the manipulation. It was his insult. Vanilla. Lower expectations for passion. Those words replayed in my head, a constant, tormenting loop. Was I truly so unexciting? Had I failed to keep his interest? The seed of doubt he had planted, watered by his infidelity, blossomed into a thorny vine of insecurity. I needed to know. I needed to understand the depth of his betrayal and perhaps to cauterize the wound of his words. So, against my better judgment, I picked up the phone and called him. I asked him straight up, my voice surprisingly steady. "How many times did you sleep with her? And how long has this been going on?" He hesitated, then sighed, a theatrical sound that grated on my nerves. "It was only twice, Scarlett," he confessed, his voice dripping with false remorse. "About 2 months ago, when things were rough with us. She was just a distraction. And, yeah, she was more adventurous, I guess. But you're perfect for me. You're everything I truly want." He even had the audacity to say that she was a little too much for him, implying I was the safe, comfortable choice. For a brief, fleeting second, his words offered a sliver of comfort, a balm to my wounded ego. "You're everything I truly want." Maybe it was just anger speaking then. Maybe he did truly prefer me. That fleeting comfort evaporated less than an hour later. Another text message, this time from a different friend, someone closer to Mark. A friend who felt guilty, who knew I deserved the truth. "He's been seeing her for almost a year, Scarlett. Not 2 months, 10 months. 10 months. Almost an entire year. Not twice, but who knew how many times? My perfect for me had been his side dish for nearly a third of our relationship. Everything he had said, everything he had done, every apology, every explanation, every compliment, it was all a lie. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, turning everything I thought I knew about him, about us, into ash. I couldn't trust anything he said anymore. The doubt about his insult, about my own sexual appeal, came roaring back, amplified by the sheer scale of his deception. He used to tell me I was the best, that I made him feel things no one else could. He used to moan my name, look at me like I was the only woman in the world. He used to say I drove him wild. But now all I could hear was his cruel laughter, his sneering words. Vanilla, lower expectations for passion. Was it all a performance? Was he truly more satisfied with her the whole time? Had our intimate moments, moments I cherished and believed in, been nothing more than a convenient charade for him? The truth he offered me was a carefully crafted fiction, designed to minimize his guilt and keep me clinging to a false narrative. But the real truth, the bitter, unvarnished truth, was slowly revealing itself, and it was far more devastating than I could have ever imagined. The anger, the hurt, and the deep, unsettling feeling of being completely, utterly played began to coalesce into something sharper, something more focused. A quiet, burning resolve. I wasn't just going to heal from this. I was going to make sure he understood the true cost of his betrayal. I spent the next few days in a haze, the bitter truth swirling around me like a toxic fog. 10 months, almost a year. The numbers echoed in my head, each digit a hammer blow against the fragile structure of my past with Mark. Every memory, every sweet word, every shared laugh was now tainted, seen through the lens of his calculated deceit. Was he laughing at me then? Was I just a convenient placeholder, a warm body on the other end of a FaceTime call while he built an entirely separate life with someone else? The anger was a living thing inside me, a hot, pulsing ember that threatened to consume everything. But beneath the anger, a colder, more insidious feeling lingered: humiliation. He had not only cheated, he had lied, manipulated, and then, with casual cruelty, tried to diminish me with his words. Vanilla. Lower expectations for passion. Those phrases were like shards of glass in my mind, cutting deeper with every replay. He had dared to define me, to label me as insufficient, all while living a double life. It wasn't just about his betrayal anymore. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, proving to myself and to him that I was anything but vanilla. I was a wildfire he had foolishly tried to put out with a lie. Mark, oblivious to the extent of my knowledge, continued his relentless pursuit. My phone buzzed constantly with his name, a digital ghost refusing to leave. He'd send long, rambling texts, filled with apologies that felt hollow and promises that rang false. He claimed he was lost without me, that he was making plans to move closer to Atlanta to prove his commitment. He even tried to gaslight me, suggesting that my friends were just trying to stir up trouble, that I was overreacting. Each message, each call, didn't soften my resolve, it hardened it. It was like he was actively trying to push me further, to pour gasoline on the fire he had already started. I tried to block him. I really did. I muted his calls, archived his messages, and even unfollowed him on social media, hoping that cutting off the digital supply line would bring some peace. But he found ways. He'd email me from different accounts, or even send messages through mutual friends, twisting their words to sound like they were advocating for him. It was a constant barrage, a reminder that he still felt entitled to my time, my emotions, my attention. His persistence, once charming, was now suffocating. It felt less like love and more like a desperate, possessive need to control. My friends in Atlanta were my lifeline. I spent hours dissecting every detail with them, replaying conversations, trying to piece together the real timeline of his deception. My closest friend, Chloe, a sharp, no-nonsense graphic designer, listened patiently, her eyes blazing with protective fury on my behalf. "Scarlett," she said one evening, after I'd finished yet another tearful recounting of Mark's latest manipulative text. "He's not sorry. He's just sorry he got caught, and he's trying to keep you on the hook in case his other thing doesn't work out." Her words hit home. It wasn't about him missing me. It was about him not wanting to lose the comfort and security I provided, the backup plan. I started throwing myself into my work, using the relentless pace of marketing campaigns as a distraction. I worked longer hours, volunteered for extra projects, anything to keep my mind from drifting back to Mark. I even took on a pro bono project for a local women's shelter, hoping that helping others would somehow heal the gaping wound in myself. But even as I created successful ad campaigns and organized events, the hollow ache remained. My professional achievements felt flat. They didn't fill the void. The whispers of vanilla still haunted my quieter moments, especially late at night when the city outside my Atlanta apartment window finally fell silent. One evening, while scrolling through my social media feed, a thought struck me. My marketing job involved a lot of data analysis, understanding audience behavior, and crafting compelling narratives that resonated with people. It was about influence, perception, and making an impact. Mark was all about perception. He meticulously crafted his image, the charming, successful, devoted boyfriend. He was a master of appearances, and he had used that skill to fool me for nearly a year. A slow, chilling idea began to form in my mind, a tiny spark in the darkness. What if I could use my skills, my understanding of how people consume information and form opinions, to expose him? Not in a petty, childish way, but in a way that truly made him confront the reality of his actions, to dismantle the carefully constructed facade he presented to the world. It wasn't about vengeance for vengeance's sake. It was about justice. It was about making him feel a fraction of the humiliation and betrayal he had inflicted upon me. And maybe, just maybe, it was about proving to myself that I wasn't vanilla, that I had the strength and the cunning to fight back. The first step, I realized, was to gather irrefutable proof. Mark was a long-distance cheater, which meant most of his illicit activities happened away from my direct observation. I knew about Sarah's text and the message from his other friend, but those were just snippets. I needed something concrete, something undeniable that would stand up against his inevitable denials and gaslighting. I started by revisiting old emails, looking for any inconsistencies, any strange travel plans, any unexplained absences. I looked through our shared digital photo albums, searching for subtle clues. It was like being a detective in my own tragedy, a painstaking and emotionally draining process. Every small discovery, every confirmation of a lie, was a fresh sting. But it also fueled the growing resolve within me. My marketing brain kicked in. I started building a sort of target profile for Mark. What did he value most? His reputation, definitely. His carefully curated image of success and charm. He also valued being seen as a good guy, a stand-up man. The idea was to attack the very foundation of his self-perception, to chip away at the mask he wore so effortlessly. This wouldn't be a screaming match or a public shaming on social media. That felt too messy, too emotional, and too easy for him to dismiss. This needed to be surgical, precise, and undeniably impactful. I recalled a conversation we had early in our relationship about his career goals. He wanted to climb the corporate ladder, eventually aiming for a high-profile position in his company. He was very image-conscious, always talking about networking, building professional relationships, and avoiding anything that could tarnish his reputation. That was his Achilles heel. His professional image. My initial thought was to anonymously report him to his company, but that felt too indirect. It wouldn't give me the satisfaction of him knowing who was behind it or why, and it might just get lost in HR bureaucracy. I wanted a more personal touch, something that would hit him where it hurt, but also be undeniably elegant in its execution. I wanted to turn his own game of deception against him. The problem, however, was still the long-distance aspect. He was states away, and directly confronting him seemed unproductive. He'd just lie, deflect, or charm his way out of it as he always did. I needed to act from a distance, to leverage the very thing that enabled his cheating the separation to become his undoing. I found myself increasingly drawn to the idea of a public, yet subtly devastating, reveal. Something that would spread through his social circle, his professional contacts, and leave an indelible mark, without ever explicitly naming me or making it look like a scorned ex lashing out. It had to look like the truth simply came out. My marketing experience had taught me the power of word of mouth, of carefully placed information, of creating a narrative that people naturally believed and spread. I began to research his social circles, his professional networks, anything that would give me an insight into the ecosystem he operated in. Who were his most trusted colleagues, his closest friends, the ones he sought approval from, the ones who would be most shocked and disappointed by his true nature? I was building a map of his vulnerabilities, charting the course for my silent, precise strike. This wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about strategy. It was about control. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of my old self returning, resourceful, intelligent, and capable of much more than just being vanilla. I was ready to play a dangerous game of my own. The more I thought about it, the more I realized his vanilla insult was not just about me, but about him. He was projecting his own need for constant external validation, his own shallowness, onto me. He needed the thrill of a dangerous game because he lacked true depth himself, and that, I decided, would be the key to his downfall. I would expose the true shallowness beneath his charming facade. This revenge wouldn't be loud or aggressive. It would be a quiet unraveling, a slow-motion car crash of his own making, orchestrated from afar. I started to collect screenshots, subtle hints from public social media posts of his and his new girlfriend. Nothing overtly damning on its own, but when pieced together, they painted a very clear picture of a timeline that contradicted his lies. I was careful, meticulous, like an artist crafting a masterpiece of quiet destruction. I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was building a story, a narrative that would expose him without me ever having to utter a single accusatory word. The problem wasn't solved yet, but the path to a solution, a truly satisfying solution, was finally becoming clear. The plan began to solidify, taking shape in my mind like a complex marketing campaign. This wasn't about being loud, it was about being precise, surgical, and utterly undeniable. Mark loved his image, his carefully constructed persona of success and devotion. That image was his most vulnerable point, and I was going to dismantle it, brick by meticulously placed brick. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to whisper and let the echoes bring his world down. My first step was to create an anonymous social media profile. Nothing too obvious, just a generic-looking account, the kind that blends into the background of the internet. I called it Truth Seeker Atlanta, subtle enough to not immediately raise suspicion, but direct enough for anyone paying attention to understand its purpose. This wouldn't be a place for direct accusations. Instead, it would be a carefully curated feed of observations. I started with the screenshots I'd been collecting. Dates, times, locations. Mark and his new girlfriend, let's call her Victoria for now, had a habit of posting about their activities, sometimes directly, sometimes subtly. Victoria, in particular, was quite active. She'd post about spontaneous weekend trips that perfectly coincided with times Mark had told me he was busy with work or visiting family. She'd share photos of meals, seemingly innocent, but often showing the corner of a table or a specific restaurant decor that I recognized from Mark's city. I began to cross-reference these posts with our own shared calendar, with old texts from Mark, and even with the vague stories he'd told me. The timeline was damning. Victoria's 2-month anniversary posts for her and Mark were well over 10 months ago, exactly matching what his friend had told me. Her gushing captions about finding true love and being so happy with my amazing boyfriend now read like a painful irony. My marketing brain took over. I thought about how a story spreads, how information gains traction. It wasn't about a single, explosive reveal. It was about creating a pattern, a trail of breadcrumbs that would lead others to the same conclusion I had reached. People tend to believe something more readily when they feel they've discovered it themselves, rather than being told outright. So I began to post. Not directly accusing Mark, but sharing the information in a way that encouraged people to connect the dots. For example, Victoria would post a picture of her and Mark at a specific landmark in his city, dating it 6 months ago. I would then, from my anonymous account, share a historical fact about that landmark, dated to the same time, subtly drawing attention to the timing. Or if Victoria posted a photo of a restaurant with a caption like, "My favorite date night spot with Bae," I'd post a picture of the restaurant's menu from their website, highlighting a specific dish, with a caption like, "Interesting how some places become so special." It was all about context, juxtaposition, and gentle prompting. The key was to be subtle, never aggressive. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't use hashtags that screamed revenge. I simply presented information that to an objective observer would start to raise questions. I focused on consistency. If Victoria posted about a holiday they took, I'd find an old post of Mark's from around the same time, perhaps a vague check-in at an airport, and share it with a caption like, "Ah, the wonders of travel, so many places to see." I also started to gather information about Mark's professional life. He was quite active on LinkedIn, constantly posting about his achievements, his leadership skills, his dedication to his company. He had a lot of connections, including higher-ups at his firm and important industry contacts. This was the ecosystem I needed to penetrate, not with gossip, but with undeniable, factual inconsistencies. I found an old company newsletter where Mark was featured, praising his dedication to a project that, according to my new timeline, coincided perfectly with one of his extended business trips with Victoria. Again, I wouldn't directly point it out. Instead, I'd find a generic article about work-life balance or corporate ethics, and subtly share it from my anonymous account on platforms where Mark and his professional connections would likely see it. It was painstaking work, requiring hours of careful research and strategic posting. Each piece of information had to be vetted, each caption crafted with precision. I wasn't just throwing mud, I was weaving a narrative, a tapestry of deceit that, when viewed from a distance, would be impossible to ignore. My friends, especially Chloe, were my confidants. I shared my progress with her, detailing each post, each subtle hint. At first, she was worried. "Scarlett," she'd say, "are you sure this isn't going to backfire? He's a master manipulator." But as I showed her the meticulously compiled evidence, the carefully planned posts, her skepticism turned into reluctant admiration. "You're really going for it, aren't you?" she'd ask, a mischievous glint in her eye. "He called me vanilla," I'd respond, a hard edge in my voice. "He's about to find out how explosive vanilla can be when it's ignited." The process wasn't without its emotional toll. Revisiting old photos, rereading past conversations, seeing Victoria's beaming face next to Mark's, all while knowing the truth, was like picking at an open wound. There were nights I cried, overwhelmed by the sheer audacity of his lies, the depth of his betrayal. But with each tear, a new layer of resolve seemed to form. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about healing, about reclaiming my sense of agency and self-worth. It was about taking back the narrative he had tried to control. I started paying close attention to his online activity, and slowly, subtly, I began to see a shift. It was almost imperceptible at first. Fewer gushing comments on his posts, a slight drop in engagement from certain professional contacts. Nothing concrete, but a subtle tremor in the carefully constructed facade. I knew it wasn't just my imagination. My posts, though anonymous and indirect, were doing their job. They were planting seeds of doubt, causing people to look at Mark's carefully curated online life with a fresh, more scrutinizing eye. The goal wasn't to publicly shame him in a way that would make me look bitter or petty. The goal was to make him responsible for the unraveling of his own lies. I wanted his connections, his friends, and even Victoria to slowly, independently, come to the realization that the man they thought they knew was a fraud. It was a slow burn, not a wildfire, but I knew that a slow burn, when strategically fueled, could be far more destructive in the long run. One evening, I saw that Victoria had deleted several old posts featuring Mark, specifically those that showed her 2-month anniversary timeline. She hadn't removed all of them, but enough to be noticeable to someone paying close attention. This was the first concrete sign that my subtle campaign was having an effect. Someone was looking, someone was questioning, and Victoria was trying to scrub the evidence. That small victory, that undeniable ripple in the pond I had so carefully disturbed, sent a thrill through me. It was working. Mark's carefully constructed world was beginning to fray at the edges, and he didn't even know who was pulling the threads. This wasn't just about making him face the truth. It was about showing him that I, the vanilla girl, could orchestrate a downfall with the precision of a master strategist. The game had truly begun, and I, Scarlett Evans, was playing to win. My revenge would be a whisper that became a roar, an unraveling of his carefully constructed lies that would leave him exposed and alone. I was no longer just a victim. I was the architect of justice, armed with screenshots and a marketing degree. And Mark was about to learn that some vanilla flavors, when mixed with enough deception, can be incredibly, devastatingly bitter. The deletion of Victoria's posts was more than just a small victory. It was a jolt of pure adrenaline. It confirmed that my carefully laid plans were working, that the whispers I was sending into the digital ether were actually causing ripples. Mark's world, built on a foundation of lies, was starting to show cracks, and he had no idea I was the one with the hammer. I intensified my efforts, focusing on the professional front. Mark valued his career above almost everything else, constantly posting on LinkedIn about his innovative strategies and unwavering dedication. He cultivated an image of a rising star, a man of integrity. This was the most crucial part of his facade, and therefore, his most vulnerable. I started compiling more specific evidence related to his professional claims. I cross-referenced his LinkedIn posts about attending industry conferences with Victoria's travel photos from the same dates. He'd post about late nights at the office, while Victoria would be sharing pictures of them enjoying a romantic dinner in a different city. None of these individual pieces of information were explosive on their own, but when presented together, they formed a damning pattern of deception and negligence in his professional life. My anonymous social media account, Truth Seeker Atlanta, became a digital puppeteer. I didn't just post about Mark and Victoria directly anymore. I started subtly engaging with his professional network. For example, if Mark posted an article about corporate ethics, I'd share it from my anonymous account with a comment like, "Integrity is key, but often overlooked when convenience calls." Or, if he posted about a new project launch, I'd share a generic article about time management or the importance of focus in a demanding role. The goal was to plant tiny seeds of doubt, to make his colleagues and superiors subtly question the man they thought they knew. I wasn't accusing, I was merely prompting. The beauty of this strategy was its deniability. If anyone ever traced it back, I could claim I was just engaging in general commentary, sharing relevant articles. But I knew, deep down, that the specific timing and context of my posts would speak volumes to those who were paying attention, especially to anyone who had already noticed Victoria's scrubbed posts. One day, a mutual acquaintance, someone who worked in Mark's industry, sent me a message. "Hey Scarlett," it read, "have you seen Mark's recent LinkedIn activity? Seems a bit off." My heart pounded. It wasn't a direct acknowledgement of my efforts, but it was a clear indication that the seeds were germinating. People were starting to notice. They were seeing the inconsistencies, the cracks in his carefully constructed image. I played it cool, of course. "Oh, I haven't really been keeping up," I replied, feigning indifference. "What do you mean, off?" the acquaintance responded. "Just some of his posts, and a few things I've heard. Seems like he's been a bit distracted lately. Not as focused as he usually is. Just a vibe, you know? A vibe." That was exactly what I was aiming for. Not a direct accusation, but a pervasive feeling of unease, a subtle shift in perception. Mark thrived on being perceived as perfect, as the golden boy. Any hint of imperfection, any suggestion of distraction or lack of focus would be a direct hit to his ego and his career aspirations. I decided to escalate my strategy. I researched key decision-makers in Mark's company, his direct manager, the head of his department, even the CEO. I learned their preferred communication channels, their interests, their online habits. This wasn't about sending them anonymous tips directly. That was too risky and could be easily dismissed. This was about creating an environment where the truth would naturally reveal itself to them. I started subtly engaging with their public posts, sharing insightful comments on industry articles they'd shared, building a tiny, almost imperceptible bridge of online interaction. My goal was to make my anonymous account a reputable source of industry commentary, so that when I shared something that subtly implicated Mark, it would carry more weight. It was a long game, a slow burn, but I was patient. The pain Mark had inflicted had settled deep, and I knew that only a truly devastating, long-lasting impact would bring me any sense of closure. The vanilla insult still echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of why I was doing this. He wanted a dangerous game? He was getting one, orchestrated by the woman he had dismissed as boring. Victoria, after her initial deletion spree, started posting less frequently, and her posts became significantly more guarded. The gushing romantic captions were replaced with generic updates, and photos rarely featured Mark directly, or if they did, his face was often obscured. She was clearly feeling the pressure, the subtle shift in her online world. This was another small victory, another confirmation that the narrative I was weaving was taking hold. She was reacting to the ripples, even if she didn't know the source. The climax of my plan began to unfold when Mark posted about being nominated for a prestigious internal company award Employee of the Quarter. It was a big deal for him, a public validation of his professional persona. His LinkedIn post about it was filled with humble brags and carefully worded expressions of gratitude. This was it. This was his Achilles heel, his moment of greatest vulnerability. I knew this was my window. I waited a few days, letting the buzz around his nomination build. Then, from my Truth Seeker Atlanta account, I crafted a series of posts. I started by sharing a generic article about the importance of ethical conduct in the workplace, with a comment about how true success is built on honesty. Then, I shared a screenshot of one of Victoria's deleted posts, a very specific one that showed them at a resort during a time Mark had claimed he was on a critical business trip for his company. I didn't tag Mark. I didn't tag his company. I simply posted the screenshot, dated it, and added a caption. Interesting how some business trips look a lot like vacations. Priorities, priorities. The beauty of this was that the screenshot itself was Victoria's post. It was her own words, her own image, incriminating them both. My anonymous account was merely reposting publicly available, albeit now deleted, information. I then shared another post, this time a screenshot of Mark's LinkedIn post about his award nomination, placed side by side with a slightly older screenshot of a comment Victoria had left on one of her own posts, gushing about a romantic weekend getaway with Mark, which directly contradicted the dates he claimed to be working intensely on the project for which he was being nominated. Again, no direct accusations, just a stark visual comparison. Let the facts speak for themselves. The response was immediate, though silent at first. The engagement on Mark's award nomination post plummeted. Comments from his colleagues, which had initially been effusive, dwindled to almost nothing. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, I started seeing activity on my Truth Seeker Atlanta posts. Not comments, but views. Lots of views. And then, a few subtle likes from unexpected places, including a few from people who were connected to Mark's professional network. The whispers were turning into murmurs. I knew it was only a matter of time before the murmurs became undeniable. The final blow came not from me, but from within Mark's own circle. One of his more discerning colleagues, someone I had observed frequently liking and commenting on ethical leadership articles, shared one of my anonymous posts on their own LinkedIn feed. They didn't add a comment, just the share, but the implication was clear. When a respected peer, someone whose integrity was unquestioned, subtly amplifies a message of potential professional misconduct, it carries immense weight. The unraveling accelerated. I saw that Victoria's entire social media presence had either gone private or been deleted. She was clearly feeling the heat, the uncomfortable scrutiny that came with being unknowingly exposed by her own past eagerness to share. Then one morning, I received a text from Sarah, Mark's friend who had initially warned me about him. Scarlett, her text read, I heard Mark's Employee of the Quarter nomination was rescinded, and there are rumors flying around the office about some inconsistencies in his work trips. His manager is apparently furious. Things are not looking good for him. A slow, satisfied smile spread across my face. It wasn't a scream. It was a whisper that became a roar. Mark's professional image, the very foundation of his carefully constructed life, was crumbling. The man who called me vanilla, who had dismissed my worth, was now facing the bitter taste of his own deception, publicly, professionally, and entirely due to his own actions being subtly brought to light. My revenge was complete, not with a confrontation, but with the quiet, undeniable power of the truth. The text from Sarah, confirming Mark's professional downfall, felt less like a roar and more like a quiet sigh of relief. It wasn't a triumphant scream from me, no fist pumping in the air. Instead, it was a deep, settling calm that spread through my chest, replacing the knot of anger and humiliation that had resided there for months. The Employee of the Quarter nomination rescinded. Rumors about his work trips. His manager furious. It was all happening, just as I had meticulously planned, but with an impact that resonated beyond simple vengeance. I reread Sarah's text, letting the words sink in, savoring the poetic justice of it all. Mark, the man who had prided himself on his impeccable professional image, the one who had built his entire identity around being the golden boy, was now facing the consequences of his duplicity. His carefully crafted facade, painstakingly built on lies and manipulation, was crumbling, not because of a public outburst, but because the subtle threads of truth I had woven had finally pulled it apart. I thought about his insult, vanilla, and a wry smile touched my lips. He had underestimated me, dismissed me as bland, boring, and easily forgotten. He had never seen the fire beneath the surface, the analytical mind, the strategic thinking that defined my work in marketing. He saw a girlfriend, a long-distance comfort, not a force to be reckoned with, and that underestimation had been his undoing. I hadn't needed to scream, to lash out, to engage in a messy public spectacle. I had used the very tools of his deceptions, social media, curated images, the power of perception, and turned them against him subtly, precisely, and with undeniable effectiveness. The phone buzzed again. It was Chloe. You heard. She asked, her voice crackling with barely contained excitement. I heard, I replied, my voice softer than I expected, tinged with a deep sense of satisfaction. Sarah just called me, Chloe continued, unable to contain her glee. Apparently, Mark is absolutely spiraling. His manager called him into a meeting and laid out all the inconsistencies, asked him to explain certain business, expenses, and travel dates. They didn't accuse him of anything directly, but they made it clear they knew something was off. He tried to deny it, of course, but the evidence was apparently compelling, and Victoria, she completely scrubbed her social media. Gone. Poof. I closed my eyes, picturing Mark, his face probably flushed with panic, trying to talk his way out of the corner I had so carefully painted him into. He couldn't. Not this time. There were no more lies he could tell, no more charming deflections he could offer that would stand up against the quiet, undeniable weight of his own documented history. Good, I said, and this time there was a genuine note of triumph in my voice. Let him squirm, Chloe laughed. Squirm doesn't even begin to cover it, Scarlett. They're launching an internal investigation. His career, the one he lorded over everyone, is essentially over. And all because someone, and we both know who that someone is, decided to be a very, very smart detective. I didn't deny it. There was no need to. Chloe knew, and that was enough. The validation wasn't from the world, but from the quiet understanding of a true friend. The days that followed brought more confirmations. Mark's professional network, once so effusive with praise, grew silent. His LinkedIn profile became a ghost town, devoid of the usual celebratory comments. The subtle likes from his colleagues on my Truth Seeker Atlanta posts intensified, a silent acknowledgement that the truth had indeed found its way to them. I even heard through the grapevine that Victoria had broken up with him, furious at being implicated in his lies, and having her own online presence scrutinized. The house of cards he had built had completely collapsed, taking with it not just his relationship with me, but his carefully constructed professional life and his relationship with his other girlfriend. I deleted the Truth Seeker Atlanta account. Its purpose had been served. It had been a tool for justice, a way to channel my pain and anger into something constructive, something impactful. As I pressed the delete button, I felt a sense of finality, a release. The revenge wasn't about destroying him completely, though that was a side effect. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, proving to myself that I was strong, capable, and far from vanilla. It was about showing him that I deserved honesty, respect, and a love that wasn't built on deceit. The healing process was still ongoing, of course. The scars of betrayal wouldn't disappear overnight. But now, they felt like battle wounds, not festering sores. They were reminders of my resilience, my intelligence, my ability to navigate the treacherous landscape of deceit and emerge stronger. The whispers of vanilla no longer haunted me. Instead, I heard Chloe's voice, telling me I was a very, very smart detective. And I heard the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had orchestrated a meticulous, undeniable downfall for the man who had tried to diminish me. I realized that my true worth wasn't dependent on Mark's approval or his perception of me. It came from within, from my integrity, my strength, and my unwavering belief in justice. My revenge wasn't just an act against him, it was an act of self-affirmation, a declaration that I would not be defined by someone else's lies. Atlanta, with its vibrant chaos, still pulsed with ambition, but now I saw it through different eyes. My work felt more fulfilling, my connections with friends deeper, more genuine. I was still Scarlett Evans, 26 years old, navigating life in a big city, but I was a transformed Scarlett. I was wiser, more discerning, and infinitely more confident. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, looking out at the glittering skyline of Atlanta, a new sense of peace settled over me. The story of Mark wasn't a story of loss anymore, but a story of rediscovery. I had lost a boyfriend, yes, but I had found my own power. And that, I realized, was a far more valuable prize than any fleeting deceptive love he could have offered. The dangerous game he had initiated had been turned on its head, and the vanilla girl had won. And that, in itself, was the sweetest revenge of all. My expectations for passion, for honesty, for respect, were not lower. They were simply, finally, set for myself. And I was ready for whatever came next, knowing I had the strength to face it and the wisdom to always seek the truth. His words, intended to break me, had forged me anew. He thought he had seen my ending. He had only witnessed my beginning. I was anything but vanilla. I was the architect of my own destiny and a master of my own dangerous game. The story of Mark wasn't a story of loss anymore, but a story of rediscovery. I had lost a boyfriend, yes, but I had found my own power. And that, I realized, was a far more valuable prize than any fleeting, deceptive love he could have offered. The dangerous game he had initiated had been turned on its head, and the vanilla girl had won. And that, in itself, was the sweetest revenge of all. My expectations for passion, for honesty, for respect, were not lower. They were simply, finally, set for myself. And I was ready for whatever came next, knowing I had the strength to face it and the wisdom to always seek the truth. His words, intended to break me, had forged me anew. He thought he had seen my ending. He had only witnessed my beginning. I was anything but vanilla. I was the architect of my own destiny and a master of my own dangerous game.